Good afternoon, 20th Century Art students. Welcome to week 5 of our class. It's our last week. It's hard to believe that this is it. This is my fifth and last webcam commentary. I want to talk a little bit about Robert Rauschenberg and briefly Jasper Johns and also Andy Warhol in these comments. But I want to start off by thanking each of you for your patience and your energy and your commitment to this class. The 5 weeks have been hard. A lot of reading. It's complex and dense reading. We've covered a lot of ground in a very short time, and I commend your efforts, and I admire your willingness and desire to sacrifice spare time when you are tired and have many other things to think about and worry about for the sake of this class. And it means a lot to me, and it motivates me as well. So I want to thank you for sticking with it and joining me on this 5-week journey. I do want to tell you I'll be teaching the Fall 1 session, a course on religion and modernism, a course that I'm very excited about, a course that will be the second time I've taught at Azusa Pacific, which will allow me to adapt it, to strengthen it. It's a topic that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. I've published several books and a number of essays on the topic. So if you haven't taken the class, I invite you to take it. Would love to have you join me for a 9-week session this fall. And then in the fall session 2, I'll be teaching the history of art criticism. I think it's called Writing Art Criticism. I teach it as a history course with some writing art criticism exercises. So I invite you to enroll for that course as well. I would love to have you. So let's move on with our with the topic today. I'd like to talk a little bit about Robert Rauschenberg and begin by talking a little more in depth about this erased de Kooning drawing. You watched the YouTube video last week of Rauschenberg describing the process of acquiring this drawing from de Kooning, and how he tells the story emphasizes the fact that he's thinking about it as a performance piece, as a conceptual work, as something that the art of it consists in the effort and in the practice and in the doing of securing this drawing. But I also want to talk about the formal component of actually erasing a drawing, what that means. On one hand, having de Kooning participate in it and give Rauschenberg a very complicated drawing that had oil marks on it, a very difficult drawing, implicated de Kooning into the process, and also created an ethical space in which de Kooning is giving Rauschenberg permission to transform this work of art, this drawing, into something else, into another work of art, into a collaboration of some kind. And on one hand, what Rauschenberg is doing is he's confronting the master. He's confronting the teacher, and he's working through him. He's trying to work through him to move beyond him, and the erasing is a symbolic attempt to do that, to maybe undo or to work through the influence. But also, I want you to keep in mind that act of erasing, of the care. Rauschenberg said it took him months to erase that drawing. Can you imagine? He knows that drawing inside and out. He knows the lines. He knows he looks at, as he's eliminating the lines and the marks, the presence of de Kooning's hand. He's noticing it, and it's an act not just of violent defacement, and I would say not at all an act of violent defacement, but an act of devotion, of care, of stewardship, of collaboration, in which de Kooning makes the first gesture, and then Rauschenberg answers with his gesture. And what is Rauschenberg's gesture? Rauschenberg's gesture is to erase it. And so the process then is an interesting collaboration in which what Rauschenberg does is create a work that has presence through its absence. It's a very complicated and a very conceptually and I think creatively sophisticated gesture, and something that I want you to spend a little time thinking about in ways that move beyond a certain kind of, oh, this is violence, it's vandalism, it's an act of defacement, and to understand the context in which those gestures take place, that de Kooning had entered into this covenant. Rauschenberg also made a couple years earlier, I think in 1951, Rauschenberg made a series of white paintings. And these white paintings had a deep influence on John Cage. Cage saw these white paintings, and I think I included, or I suggested that you read some writing that Cage wrote, some reflections that Cage wrote on Rauschenberg's white paintings in his collection of essays called Silence, in which he talks about these white paintings as landing strips. And they're landing strips for dust, for light, for reflection, for shadow, for all of those things that we don't notice. Those white paintings aren't giving an emotional statement saying, here I am feeling, emoting, here's the integrity of my individual human act, which was the position of the gesture painters within the context of abstract expressionism. What Rauschenberg is doing is eliminating that and just creating a space, a frame for which atmosphere, for which the unpredictable, for chance, for other kinds of visual phenomenon to be captured in some way, framed in some way. And those paintings, those white paintings that Rauschenberg painted in 1951 had a profound influence on Cage and actually influenced his musical composition, 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, in which what Cage is doing is framing silence. So like the white canvases, the silence frames sound and creates sound, makes us attentive orally to the stimuli in the world, just as Rauschenberg's visually blank canvases make us optically and visually attentive to what we may miss in the world. I want you to, I included in the email that this webcam commentary, I included an example of the white paintings. I also included two paintings by Rauschenberg called Factum 1 and Factum 2. And what Rauschenberg was interested, both of these paintings were painted in 1957. What Rauschenberg did was paint a replica. In Factum 2, he paints a replica of Factum 1. The focus for Rauschenberg is to demonstrate that the drip, the gesture, the abstract, spontaneous brushstroke is a language. It has a structure. And that it's not just an immediate expression of emotion, but it has an objective linguistic or an objective structure as a language. And what Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns are interested in is taking the heat of the abstract expressionism emotion and emphasize that it is mediated. It's deeply mediated through the practice, through the language, through the structures of paint, and that to understand those as signs for emotion, and not just merely emotion undiluted or direct or unmediated expression, but expression as it is made symbolic through line and form. And that the spontaneity is something that is also blended with a conceptual and a conscious use of a particular kind of language that signals authenticity, that signals emotional intensity. And so what Rauschenberg is doing is emphasizing that, that play as well. For Johns, what he's interested in with his paintings, his encaustic paintings of flags, for example, with his encaustic painting of the American flag, is to ask us, is this a flag, an American flag, or is it a representation of an American flag? And what are we to make of representation? How are we to understand it? And how far away is it from the object, the phenomenon, the experience that art, painting, or sculpture represents? Because what Johns is giving us is not just a painting of a flag or a representation of an object, but moving us in that direction of the object. And so the work operates in a much more complex way and forces us to think about this relationship between representation. Painting and the image is a representation of objects, phenomenon, etc. in the world. And leads us right back to what we were looking at in the very first week in terms of abstraction and expressionism. What is the relationship of the painted, of painted representation? What does it represent? Is its identity based upon what it represents, or is its identity based upon the fact that it is an artifact in the world, among other artifacts? And so Johns is drawing our attention to that the painting of a flag is an object in the world like the flag. For Andy Warhol, Warhol was trained as a commercial artist, and in your reading emphasizing his interest in popular culture and media culture. He's seen as in some ways kind of the bête noire, the beginning of the end as in terms of the dominance of popular culture, and his comment, "Everyone's famous for 15 minutes," seems to presume that he celebrates the superficiality. But Warhol moved from commercial art, a successful career in commercial art, to fine art in order to explore in more depth what I would suggest to you is one subject, and that is death. Vanity of vanity, everything is passing away. Warhol grew up in a very pious Byzantine Catholic family in Pittsburgh. Went to Byzantine Catholic Mass weekly. Was very much interested in icons. And his paintings of Marilyn Monroe, for example, operate as icons. As a woman who died tragically, whom we know nothing about except through the icon, the images in the media, and the sensationalism that media generates. And Warhol offers something, perhaps something else, something deeper, a passing away, sadness. His comment about everyone is famous, in the future everyone will be famous for 15 minutes, is a sad comment. It's a wistful comment that that life's meaning is transient and passing away and superficial. Warhol was obsessed with death, and the one thing that a commercial artist cannot be interested in is death, because a commercial artist, in generating consumption and generating desire for the acquisition, for the consumption of goods and services, is to always emphasize youth, desire, the today of consumerism satisfies the tomorrow of desire. And death is something that is put off to the side. But Warhol wanted to reflect on death, wanted to think about death, wanted to use his creativity in the service of exploring it. And so his interest in painting is an interest in, manifests an interest in exploring these deeper issues. And his focus on a series of silkscreens from the electric chair, of the car crash series, are grisly, horrifying studies in the tragedy of death and how death is reported through the media. And so there's a profound depth in Warhol's work that often gets overlooked when we see him simply as a pop artist, the kind of blasé, banal artist that cares only about fashion, and that just could not be further from the truth. So I lift up Warhol as an artist for you to spend a little more time looking at. So with with my comments on Warhol concluded, I want to conclude this last week 5 webcam commentary. Again, I thank you for your patience. I thank you for your efforts. I thank you for the desire that you have to study art and to do so at this level. I am humbled and grateful for the opportunity to work with you, and I wish you well. Goodbye.